welcome to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. There's no denying the fact that Adelaide is just one of those cities that can't help itself but breed amazing bands. Sure, you can look at groups like the Angels, Cold Chisel and more, but why not look at groups like Stolen Youth, The Rivalry, Sleeptalker and Dick Wolf? They're also amazing bands, and for the trainspotters amongst us, you might recognise that those bands have one constant thread, and that's Jesse Coulter. Jesse's been in the music scene for a good number of years now, whether it be up the front of bands or behind the scenes, but at every turn he's in charge of quality. One of the most prominent projects he's been associated with is none other than Grenadiers, a three-piece rock outfit which formed in 2009 and released 3 records over the ensuing 8 years. Following a lineup change in those formative years, Grenadiers released their second album, Summer, in 2015, and it was a little bit of a corker. It got them some decent attention and even nabbed them a spot on Triple J's Like a Virgin series. After their third album, Find Something You Love and Let It Kill You, Grenadiers went a little bit quiet, and in fact they've not actually played a show since 2019. But that's all about to change this May, because Grenadiers are hitting the Crown and Anchor in Adelaide for a 10-year celebration of summer on May 3rd. It's likely the last time you'll see them, so I figured now was the time to have a chat with Jesse about the band. But before we get into that, I strongly urge you to buy a ticket to Grenadiers' upcoming gig, and once you're done doing that, pop Summer on the stereo, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. Jesse Coulter, thank you very much for joining this episode of Trusty Chords.
Thanks for having me, man.
For those who don't recognise your name, could you give me a quick few words on who you are and why we're chatting today?
My name's Jesse. I play in a band from Adelaide called Grenadiers. We have been pretty quiet for the last little while, but put out a few records in 2010, I think, 2015 and 2018, if memory serves me correctly. And the one that we released in 2015 is called Summer, which we're celebrating 10 years of, which feels pretty wild, but here we are.
Definitely feel like it's gone like very quick. I mean, I still remember when Summer actually first came out, and I remember buying my vinyl copy of it from Clarity and thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one.
Awesome.
Threw it on the turntable, but we'll get into that soon, because what I like doing at the start of these podcasts is actually going back in time a little bit to where a love of music first formed. So for you, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first really resonated with you?
Yeah, not like a super specific lightning bolt kind of moment, but I do recall being very young and adoring, especially being in the car with the family whenever like the Kinks would come on, or the Animals' House of the Rising Sun was a big favorite. The Beatles in general, just all the sort of upbeat 60s rock really excited me as a kid. And I just remember really being in love with that stuff, and that sort of being the groundswell of an interest in music.
Definitely been finding a lot of the folks I sort of chat to have that almost like a very similar sort of memory, where, I mean, in my case, listening to like Triple M, going from like, north of Adelaide into Adelaide and hearing all that sort of the classic rock and hearing things like, like the Kinks, the Animals and everything, and sort of realizing, holy shit, there is this like really wide world of stuff that is sort of like, I don't know, like hidden gems of music, which you're sort of like finding and thinking, oh wow, I really like what's going on here. So I'm assuming that was a similar case for you, where you're sort of like, this sounds pretty cool, I want to learn more. And did you sort of do a bit of research yourself?
Yeah. I wouldn't call it research. My dad was both my parents, but especially dad used to play in bands and was very music literate and loved all of that stuff, as well as a lot of other music, but there was always music playing in the car or around the house. And so that was kind of what made me pick up on it, I guess. But later on I sort of found things that I liked as opposed to just listening to what I heard. I remember the first band that I really found on my own and got heavily into, and it was the one that made me want to pick up a guitar when I was about 10, was the Presidents of the United States of America. Obviously sounds a little twee, some of the songs now, but like to a 10-year-old kid, songs like Peaches and Kitty were like amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, and there's songs that still hold up as well. Although I think whenever anyone mentions them and they sort of say like, oh yeah, they're a band that sort of inspired me. I mean, were you sort of thinking, do I want a bass or do I want a guitar? Because like they're using those sort of the bass guitar or git bass things, and it's sort of like, well, I can have both, right?
Yeah, well, again, going back to my dad being a band guy, there was always a guitar around the house, so that was the natural choice.
Because usually my next question here is, are there any particular artists that you sort of really that really resonated with? So I mean, you mentioned the Presidents, you mentioned listening to like the Kinks and the Animals. So were there any particular artists that you're really picking up from your parents along the way that was sort of quite influential to your musical journey?
I mean, the Beatles was a really big one. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I more just think about music from an era, and I think specifically of the '60s more so than an artist or even any songs in particular. But yeah, I mean, probably the biggest single artist would be the Beatles and the Kinks. Those were the two big ones for me when I was a kid.
Yeah, right. So you mentioned that it was the likes of the presidents that sort of like made you want to pick up a guitar. So I guess what did those early days look like when you actually started playing music? Like, were you sort of getting into it with the idea of, hey, I want to join a band, or were you just getting into it with the idea of, I want to learn how to play some songs? Like, I want to learn how to play Peaches. Like, was that
Yeah,
your plan?
yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much. Not specifically, but just like uh, I'd had a bash at trying to pick up a guitar when I was younger, 6, 7, 8. Didn't really stick, and then when I was probably 10, I picked it up and actually stuck with it. And Dad showed me a couple of bar chords and open chords, and then I just kind of screwed around in my room until I could make them sound good together. And yeah, learned a few songs by ear, and didn't really have any lessons until sort of later in high school and stuff. So I was self-taught for the first bunch of years I was playing guitar. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always wanted to pick it up, but it takes a lot of effort. And I guess I was a kid that if I wasn't immediately good at something, I would give it straight up. So it took me a couple of times of failing, trying and failing before it actually stuck.
I understand that for sure. So I always find that like most people who who are either self-taught or they sort of are learning music from a young age, they also always tend to start writing songs like quite young. Like were you someone who was like writing songs as well? Or were you just trying to sort of like, play along? I mean, you're nodding, but I
Oh
mean,
yeah, for
were the
sure.
songs
I
good?
reckon I mean, by the standards of a 10-year-old that's been playing guitar for, 2 months, I'd say they were pretty good. But yeah, I remember writing a couple of dumb songs when I was, 10 years old
Yeah.
that I wouldn't even suffer the indignity of recounting at this point. But yeah, I mean, I was definitely like, I was writing songs before I was learning other people's songs,
Yeah. Yeah.
really.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to always sort of go back through my own sort of musical history. I mean, as you can see in the background here, I've got a guitar. I've played guitar for like 20 odd years now. And whenever I sort of think back to the early days,
I
I'm just
see a
sort of,
lot of CDs as well.
there are a lot of CDs, a lot of vinyl downstairs. There's,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of a wasted youth spent at record stores and all that sort of thing, buying up everything I can find.
Not wasted.
No,
Not wasted.
I like to think it's money well spent. It's a musical education. These days, it's tax deductible, which I'm not going to complain about. But yeah, I always tended to look back at the early sort of songs that I wrote, and I just sort of think, you know what? This is pretty terrible, but they are good building blocks for what would sort of come later. So you've obviously been playing in bands for quite a long time. But I guess, talk me through a bit of your sort of musical history with playing in bands. Like, what was the first band that you played in?
Uh, yeah, well, I guess if you count everything, then the first band would have been when I was like 13, screwing around with some friends in a garage. The first band that actually played a show was we had several names. The name that we played under the most was the Purple Hearts, but we started out as the Kamikaze Test Pilots, and we did like I guess you'd say like 60s garage rock. Um, I also played around the end of high school in a stoner rock Caius worship band called Myopia. And then I joined my first real band that sort of, those bands played shows and stuff, and, they were a real band in that sense. But the first real band, quote unquote, that actually, did real stuff and released records and went on tour and stuff was called the Rivalry, which was I probably joined that band when I was 17, and we lasted until I was like 22 or something. But we did a lot of stuff. We toured Australia a bunch of times, released a couple of albums, went to Japan. And that was the big formative experience. And yeah, it was as that band was clearly about to break up that I decided to do Grenadiers, which stuck around for a long time.
Because I was also like, I always forget about the website, what Adelaide Music fandom or something like that, which always seems to be really good with like mentioning musicians like yourself is on there as well. So listing a bunch of
Oh
like
yeah,
other artists that you'd play with, like bands like Donkey Kong was one that's listed. Were
yeah,
you playing with them? Yeah,
yeah. So I that what I just mentioned wasn't the whole lot. Yeah, there was Donkey Kong, which was a real flashpoint hardcore band in the early 2000s. That was a lot of fun that I sang in. I also played guitar for many years in a band called Stolen Youth, which I loved for many years before I had the privilege of joining them. Uh, and yeah, I sang in another hardcore band called Dick Wolf. Um, Played it in a band called Sleeptalker with some people from like Paper Arms. Um, that was a pretty cool band. We only did, 3 or 4 shows before we just petered off into nothingness. But yeah, I've done lots of bits and pieces over the years. But yeah, I guess the ones that have done the most have been Grenadiers, Stolen Youth, and to a lesser extent, the Rivalry.
gee, on the topic of Stolen Youth, I was actually wondering then, were you playing with Stolen Youth when they supported NoFX at Theberton Theatre?
Yes,
Because I think that would have been
they
the
may
first
have
time I
done it
saw you then.
multiple. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they may have done it multiple times, but I do remember playing with yeah, with Stolen Youth supporting Bad Religion and NoFX playing together. Is that the one you're at?
That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, it's like September
Yeah.
2009, if my memory is correct.
Yeah, it was. I remember it was grand final day. I remember that distinctly because
Yeah.
I went to watch the grand final with my family and I was like, okay, I'm going to have like one beer. I ended up having like 6 or 7 and probably being a little bit too tipsy to to play. Like I was quite excited for that show. I'd never played at Theberton Theatre before, and Bad Religion are a big band for me. So yeah, probably fluffed a couple of guitar parts there. I distinctly remember that, but that was a fun experience.
I mean, on a lineup with no effects, even if you had 6 or 7 beers, you're still probably one of the most sober ones on stage. So,
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
think Bad Religion took themselves a bit more seriously.
They certainly did. No, that's a gig that I remember very well. I remember taking a young friend of mine as one of his sort of first gigs that he'd ever really seen, and I remember him walking away just thinking like, wow, that's a pretty good way to start my gig going career, I should say. But yeah, I think that was the first time I would have seen you live. Obviously, I've seen you a little bit with Grenadiers since, and I feel like that's probably a good little segue because I think it would have been around about 2009 or so that Grenadiers first emerged. Um,
Yeah,
but I guess, what was the plan for a band like that at the time? Because, you obviously played in some other bands, but was there a specific sound you were after? Because having a few different bands with different vibes, what was it that sort of set this one apart in your mind?
yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah. So I was in the Rivalry at the time, and that was kind of a chaos metal thing. Taking elements of hardcore and death metal and um, various other things. So think of bands like Converge or those were sort of our worship points. Um, and that was really fun, but it was really technical and complicated and hectic and a different energy. But I grew up listening to and always sort of my favorite genre of music loosely it was just rock and roll. So I definitely had it in my mind that when this is over, um, I want to do a rock and roll band. And the big turning point was I had a friend that introduced me to a band called Hot Snakes. And as soon as I heard them, I fucking freaked out. And I was like, this is completely transformative for me. I need to play in a rock and roll band and I want it to sound just like this. So that was the initial nucleus of it. Also, massively into the Bronx at the time. So Hot Snakes and the Bronx were the big influences to start Grenadiers. And then all the other influences that I'm a big fan of found their way in there. I always get told that there's a big Queens of the Stone Age influence in um, Grenadiers, which probably wasn't like intentional, but I did worship that band as a teenager, so it's found its way in there for
I mean,
sure.
especially how you mentioned you're playing in a bit of a Caius sort of like in a worship band before. It makes sense that follows.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, the first album from Grenadiers was what, 2010, I think. And then after that, there was a bit of a lineup shift. And you were the only sort of original member left. But I guess how did the band from like 2010 feel compared to the band of like 2015? Like, did it still feel like Grenadiers for you, or was there a bit of a evolution along the way?
Yeah, completely different bands, really. Although it was always called Grenadiers, and it was always my band in the sense that I was driving it, writing all the songs, and being the sort of driving force behind the whole thing. Um, yeah, it wasn't until we landed on the lineup that we're playing this show with, which is me, Jimmy, and Phil. That sort of all came together as we were starting to record the album Summer, and it was really Jimmy's drumming and Phil's bass, but more broadly, Phil's musicality and actually just the musicality of those two guys in general that really sort of turned us from a good, local rock band into like a really good local rock band that could stand up on a national stage. And, yeah, we just went from being, serviceable, good live band that was, fun to listen to and had some good songs to being really tight and really, taking it seriously and wanting to push things a bit further.
I'm pretty sure it would have been around the time that that lineup was solidified, was the first time I actually saw Grenadiers. And I mean, obviously, it was also around that time that we have the release of Summer. So I mentioned, obviously, there's the CDs behind me. I do have the vinyl of Summer here because I thought, why not bring
Hey,
out a bit of a prop? And that makes it,
love that.
it's a wonderful, wonderful record. It's also a record that actually, I was looking at it again earlier because I listened to it today. It even just like, it looks good as well, right? Even down to the way the credits and the songs are listed and everything. There's obviously a lot of care taken in
Yeah.
this record.
Yeah, we put a lot of effort into that, and we gave the graphic design duties to Tom Crosby, who plays drums in Paper Arms,
Right.
and he nailed it. We basically just said we want it to look like a classic record, a '60s record.
Mm.
Um, no, liner sleeve or no gatefold or anything. It just think basic, and he nailed that brief down to like there's an artificial like ring around the
Yes.
actual vinyl on the front cover that's
Yeah.
confected to look like it's been sitting in someone's record collection in the sun for a while.
I mean, even when I looked at it today, I just sort of thought, oh, wow, I haven't been storing this one too well. Then I remembered, oh, wait, no, that's how it's supposed to look. So,
Yep,
job
that
done,
was
I
that
guess.
was intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, tell me a bit about that album. Like, how did that album feel when you were making it? Like, or like, how do you look back on it these days? Like, is it an album that like still stands up as a real strong point for you?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It really was a big step up. And the songs were good. But really I think more than the songs being good, it was the sort of energy level and just rapport musically between the three of us that made it kind of step up. And yeah, that was the real flashpoint changing point for that band was the release of that record and kind of people going, oh, beyond our friends and friends of friends that would come see us live at that point. All of a sudden, we're getting, we had feature record on Triple J and we're getting played on radio and starting to get some good supports and people are taking notice and we're actually selling more than 10 tickets to headline shows that we're doing. And, that was the turning point for sure.
Because I even remember like when you guys were on what Triple J's Like a Version, and I think that to me still feels like really weird that that happened. Because like it's almost like one of those things where like like for someone who's a music fan in Adelaide to see a band like you guys on that national platform, it's sort of almost like wow, like anyone, it can happen to anyone. If it's sort of like these
Mm.
musicians that you admire, who you're seeing in pubs around the place, are able to do it, it can happen for anyone. And I mean, like that must have been a little bit surreal as well, having such a huge platform like that.
Yeah, for sure. It was hearing yourself on the radio and stuff. Like I remember the first time that happened, I was mopping a floor at a chicken shop that I worked in and heard my band come on the radio. This was before summer. It was just on Short Fast Loud a few years before that. But yeah, that's a big moment when you have that experience for the first time.
And so I think it would have been around that time as well. Was I think the last time I saw you guys, which is actually when you supported Bad Dreams in Melbourne at Howler,
Mm,
which I think was about 2016 or so. I'm really sort of stretching my memory
yep.
there, but I mean, I think that was sort of between the release of Summer and the release of the last album, which was Find Something Love and Let It Kill You, which is another brilliant album, another really nicely. Again, I'm looking at the artwork for it. Again, it's done so well. Like you guys clearly put a lot of thought into the packaging of things. And I feel that that must be something that's very important to you. I mean, you mentioned the idea of the 60s sort of like artwork for Summer, and then this Find Something You Love and Let It Kill You just feels really nice as well. I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but I can only assume that like how a record also looks and sort of like feels in the hands is as important as it sounds for you as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, aesthetics is a big thing, you know. I mean, that's kind of a lot of people model an identity on that, you know.
Mm,
Um, and it all filters back into the music, and the music filters back into the aesthetic. It's all one thing, really.
totally. So, and that record I was mentioning just then, "Find Something You Love and Let It Kill You," not the snappiest title to sort of say in conversation, but brilliant record nonetheless. But it's the most recent album we've had from Grenadiers. But was it planned to sort of be, I guess, the last album from the band? Was that sort of the case?
Nah, not at all. Not at all. But yeah, you know, things happen. And I mean, we were probably getting a bit older and people's, you know, priorities were changing a little bit. And we never broke up. We just kind of stopped doing as much stuff.
Mm.
We actually recorded a full EP of songs after that, that, you know, was pretty good and never got released. It's still sitting on a hard drive somewhere. So yeah, it was never like intended to be the last record. But I guess it kind of by default has ended up being that. You know, who knows, you know, what we're going to do in the future, but we're definitely not. We're in a different point of our lives now. We're not trying to be the world's biggest band or anything.
Of course, but I mean, I should say, is there a chance that Unheard EP could like be heard at some point for all the diehard Grenadiers fans out there hoping for more at some point?
Yeah, maybe, maybe. I don't know how many diehard Grenadiers fans there are, but
Well, I
yeah, for
mean,
all eight of them,
you've sold a few tickets to the upcoming gig, so
yeah, yeah, it's going well. Actually, I'm excited about it.
which that's also a nice little segue for the next question, which is, there is the 10-year anniversary show for summer coming up at the Crown and Anchor on May 3rd. So, firstly, folks, buy a ticket. But secondly, what made you guys decide to come out and do another show? Because I think it's been, well, when was the last Grenadiers gig? Like end of 2019 or something? I think it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, yeah, correct. It was pre-COVID, so this is the first show in 5 years or more, 6 years, really.
Jeez.
Um, so yeah, it's been a while, and you know, to that effect, I was pretty hesitant, not hesitant to do it because I thought it would be fun. Me, Jimmy, and Phil never fell out of touch. We've always remained really good friends, and talk to each other and hang out all the time. So I wasn't worried about that, but I just was like, shit, can we still play? Can I still sing? Um, but yeah, after a couple of jams, I'm pretty confident, it's sounding really good. So you know, notwithstanding some catastrophic fuck up on the night, I think I think it should be a fun show.
Yeah, well, I guess he's hoping the Crown Anchor doesn't, shut, about 2 months early and leave you guys without a venue. But
Now, well, I'm in the fortunate position of that's my day job is booking venues, and I book the Crown and Anchor. So
yeah,
hopefully, I would be the first to know if anything was going to happen like that.
for a 10th anniversary show, how do you guys sort of like, plan to sort of make it, worthy of an anniversary sort of gig? Because I mean, obviously the first show after what, 5.5 years, almost 6 years, and people are sort of like, okay, Grenadiers are back for a show, and obviously 10-year anniversary. How do you sort of plan to make it special? Like, yeah, I'm assuming that you're playing the album in full. That's the plan, is it?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess that's part of it is you know that we've never done that before. We never played that album in full, start to finish, and there are songs on that record that we I don't think there's any songs in that we've never played live, but there are three or four of them that we only ever played once or twice live. Um, and yeah, we've certainly never played the whole thing start to finish. So that's a pretty interesting sort of component of it. But more broadly, just really trying hard to make it good. Um, you know, not just sort of phoning it in, really practicing, really, you know, putting the effort in. That's really all there is to it. We're not going to be, you know, wearing iron cod pieces with like belt sanders and, you know, I don't know, flame dragons or something like that. But as far as the actual nuts and bolts of playing the thing properly, that's how we plan to make it special. Is just doing it proper.
You can save the cod pieces for the 20th anniversary show of summer. Um,
Yeah,
but
good call.
when like in the organization of this chat I was chatting to Phil and everything, and he was basically saying, if you haven't seen Grenadiers, you shouldn't be holding your breath for another gig. So you mentioned before that you never know what the future holds, but I mean, is that the case? Is it a case of sort of like if you want to see Grenadiers, buy a ticket to this one, don't be waiting for a follow up?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm not going to say we're never going to play again, but our last show was 6 years ago. Who knows when the
Yeah.
next one's going to be? It could be when we're 85, you know? So yeah, if you want to, if you ever had an interest in the band, come to this one.
And you mentioned before how your day job is like booking venues and everything. So like I mean obviously you are sort of quite involved in the world of music, but apart from Grenadiers and working on that, are you working on anything musically yourself at the moment?
No, no, and I've always been very much a project oriented music guy.
Mhm.
I don't, I'm, I don't know, like I wouldn't really sit around and sing for the purpose of getting better or practice other people's songs, you know, for practice's sake or to learn them for any, like, I'm a project guy. So I would be like, I'm going to write 5 songs for an EP. I'm going to, uh, I'm going to learn these 20 songs for this cover band for a wedding that I agreed to do, or like, yeah, all the bands I've ever been in, the project has been the next record. Um, and yeah, there's no project now. I don't play in any bands on any sort of permanent basis. So no, I don't really do anything outside of this thing. And I don't miss it, to be honest. Like, and that's the whole thing. Like, if I, it's every now and again, people that are used to me being a band guy, they'll say something like, "Oh, it's sad that you don't play music anymore." But to me, the sad thing would be if I were still playing music because I felt like I had to, and I wasn't enjoying it, and I was just going through the motions. Um, I pick up a guitar or sing if and when I feel like it, and I want to do a proper job of it.
That's totally fair. I mean, it's the sort of thing where as long as you're happy with everything that you're doing, that's the main thing. You know, I mean, as a certain band's third album said, find something you love. I'm not going to say the last bit because that's just indicating some sort of negative future. But no, I'm very glad you're happy with what you're doing, and I'm very glad that we're seeing Grenadiers taking the stage one more time next month. So feels like it's
Yeah,
wins
it's
all
going to be
round.
good.
Hmm.
It's going to be good. Looking forward to it.
So I feel like I should get down to the portion of the podcast in which its namesake is derived. So trusty chord sees me following the 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord. A bit of a one for the music nerds out there. Ask about one artist that has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and 5 songs you can always turn to. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit wordy in its explanation, but I am determined to make it happen one day. So my first question for you here, Jesse, who is the one artist that has inspired you the most, whether it be personally or creatively?
Well, we've talked about both of them already, but I think as far as like just music in general, it's got to be the Beatles. Just you know, always present in my life. Probably the first band I can really remember listening to and engaging with at a visceral, emotional level, and have never stopped listening to them. If I'm ever in doubt, I'll put on the Beatles. They're just
I
a great
mean,
band.
you can't go wrong, can you? I mean, you're so many talented people in that band, and they're always making such great, well, they were always making such great music. And it's just sort of like there's such a wide, vast discography that you can't really go wrong with. There's so many different eras as well. There's everything.
Yeah, there's a lot to sink your teeth into, and it's like it's got even by today's standards, it still sounds amazing, but it also has to be appreciated for just how game changing it was in so many ways. Obviously, fandom, had never in terms of pop culture, music had never experienced that sort of thing before. People just screaming in the streets and like literally a million people turning up to greet a band in the street when they would arrive in a city. That's unheard of. But then also things like recording techniques, song structure, and just they just changed everything. They flipped everything on its head. So pretty amazing band. But I have to throw a second one in here in terms of that. That's me as a fan of music, but on Grenadiers, it's Hot Snakes. So, like I said before, hearing them for the first time really just set off a spark in my brain. And I was like, I need to do this. I'm a big fan of everything else all those guys have done, Obits and Rocket from the Crypt and the Night Marchers and all the other bands that John Reese and the other guys have been in. And that was a real turning point as well. And that was the sort of genesis of Grenadiers. We never ended up really sounding like Hot Snakes, unfortunately, because goddamn, what a band. Um, but yeah, as far as Grenadiers specifically, as a band, one band that had the most influence on Grenadiers existing as an organism, it's Hot Snakes.
So my next question for you is, what are three albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums you're always throwing on, or something that was integral to your musical evolution.
Yeah, a few pop to mind. Propagandy supporting cast is a big one. Had the privilege of touring with them in Stolen Youth,
Yes.
and that was a real big thing for me because they're a huge band in my mind. Just lyrically, musically, everything about them is pretty amazing, and that record was a big turning point for them sonically, turned them into the band that they are today, and they've gone through a few different eras, but that, yeah, I just remember being blown away the first time I heard that.
Yeah,
Um,
and they're also back. Only like they've really started releasing new music again, haven't they?
yeah, yeah, and the new
Yeah,
song is killer.
yeah. I haven't actually
Yeah,
listened to
so
it yet,
well,
but
actually, they've released two new songs. The first one, I'm just blanking on what it's actually called, but the second one's called Cat Guy. I don't know, it came out a couple of days ago, but but yeah, really good. And I don't think that's a band that's ever going to release bad music, you know.
I think that the
So,
song was
but
at
supporting
peace by the
cast
looks of it. Yeah.
at peace. Yeah, sorry,
Yes.
it's the
Yeah.
title
No.
track from the upcoming record.
Supporting cast is a
Yeah,
brilliant record though. Very very nice choice.
yeah, yeah.
What would the next?
That was one.
Yeah. What the next would
The
be?
Bronx second record, the Bronx 2, was a big one. The first one was huge. I saw them at Enigma Bar touring that first record in probably 2004, I reckon, and blew me away. But the second album, I was waiting for it, and that just, yeah, blew my head off. And that was also like almost equal to Hot Snakes in terms of me wanting to be in a punk rock band, but with the emphasis on the rock. Um, yeah, big record for
It's
me.
so
And
huge. Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, like actually, I
yeah,
mean, what? Sorry to sort of interrupt you a bit there, but yeah, look, one
that's
of
all
the
right.
songs that I like, I think one of my absolute favorite songs of all time has to be "Shitty Future." It's just,
Oh, it's a
like,
killer.
it's amazing, and just like his scream, like just throw. I mean, his scream at any time is amazing. It's the sort of thing you can hang your hat on any song that he does, and just like this is the sort of vocals I would kill to have. But "Shitty Future" for me is
Oh
one that
yeah,
always sticks right out, and how it goes into history, Stranglers as well. There's so much to love about that record.
yeah. Well, it's visceral, you know. Like
Mhm.
every time those sort of where there's like a drum fill and it kicks back into History Stranglers or something like that. Those stop and start dynamic moments on that record, you just want to break everything in sight, and it just makes you angry, but in a good, positive, fun way. You know, like
It's pure
it's just
catharsis.
full of it's pure. That's a very good way of putting it. Pure catharsis, just full of piss and vinegar, and it just really like fills you with those things.
Amazing. And what would the third album be for you, Jesse?
I kind of found myself gravitating towards the Peep Temple here.
Hmm.
Um, I was thinking specifically in the context of Grenadiers, mainly like later in our, like on the Find Something You Love and Let It Kill You sort of era. We went a little bit more laconic, a little like, less less hardcore influence, I guess, and more of a sort of Aussie rock type flavor and cleaner guitars, and the Peep Temple were part of that for me, and their album Tales that came out in 2014 was just such a great record, so much personality and character, and some really great lyrics, and just doesn't get old. You know, it's a great record by a great Australian band.
There's also just something about how sort of like how casual Peak Temple feels as well. Like, so many
Mm.
bands have those sort of lyrics where you just sort of think like, oh, I couldn't write this. But you listen to like the Peak Temple and you're sort of like, well, shit, this feels like my mate down the pub wrote this. There's
Totally.
something about it that's just so sort of endearing isn't the word I'm looking for. That's the best way I can sort of think to describe it. You just sort of like,
Yeah.
yeah, you listen to it and you're like, I'm proud of who this band are. I'm proud to be sort of existing at the same time as them.
The difference is your mate down the pub couldn't have written that song, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, amazing band.
So lastly, I'd love to know the five songs you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all, your five trusty songs.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave me this in advance, like as a heads up, because I could have labored over this for a million years, and if you put me on the spot, I would not have been able to name probably a single thing.
And by all
But
means, feel free to have honorable mentions as well. I always allow people
well,
to have honorable mentions if they want.
I'll start with an honorable mention. I haven't mentioned it as one of my five, but House of the Rising Sun by the Animals
Mm.
is a real bit of a comfort song. Like it's the first song I can remember loving. Um, So that's a bit of an honorable mention. But the five that I really sort of thought of, first one would be Propaganda, Back to the Motor League.
Oh yes,
Uh, I mean, great band, haven't put out a lot of dud music. It's all the songs are great, but that's one track that you could listen to every day for the next 10 years. And it's always going to make you, want to fucking drive at 150 k's an hour, or just jump up and down and break things. And it's just such a fun song, which they're not always a fun band. They're quite serious and quite you know quite noodly and intricate. This song just balls to the wall punk rock with a great lyric, and it's just a lot of fun, and you could listen to it every day.
absolutely.
So
I mean,
that's the first one.
I always find actually very fitting that like you mentioned how Stolen Youth supported Propaganda. Pretty much everything that I've bought on the Propaganda front, I've bought from Clarity. So buying from Footy from Stolen Youth, so it makes perfect sense, and it feels very very fitting to do it like that.
Yeah, well, you should see Propaganda's. Footy's personal Propaganda collection. It's
I've
outrageous.
seen some of the stuff he's like shared on like social media, and it is truly insane. Like I
Yeah.
just like yeah, like I'm a huge fan of music nerds and people who just like love collect. I mean, you can see behind me the CD collection, so you can sort
Yeah,
of
it's
see that
right.
I'm on that sort of right sort of vein. But yeah, I love seeing folks like him and the sort of stuff that they collect. It is
Oh,
truly
he's
great.
committed, man. He is committed. We've been, like traveling together at times, and he's disappeared for half a day to go out into some weird, faraway suburb of Brisbane or wherever we are to buy a $500 7-inch off of some like punk lord from Discogs or what I don't know. Like, he's very invested and just a walking library of punk rock basically. But yeah, his music collection's crazy. But Propaganda in particular, he's got that album, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes, every possible permutation of it you could possibly imagine, every color of vinyl, every different international zone that's pressing, like every different label that's had an imprint or whatever. He's got like 25 copies of that record.
He's a man after my own heart, and truly, there's no one better to be running a record store like Clarity.
Absolutely.
So what would the second song be?
Uh, I just wanted to put in a Midnight Oil song, and it could be one of 10 Midnight Oil songs. I chose Dream World just because I don't know. There's just something about that song. I mean, your podcast is Trusty Chords, I would assume, after the Hot Water Music song of the same name.
Yes, indeed.
Hot Water Music did a great version of Dream World. Um, and Midnight Oil have been covered ad nauseum by lots of great bands. And there's a reason for that, is because they wrote great songs. And when we were recording Find Something You Love and Let It Kill You in particular, our mantra was, if we ever got stuck in a songwriting process, it was just, what would Midnight Oil do?
Mm.
Or what would Rob Hurst do specifically on the
Yes.
drums? But just a great band. And yeah, I'm not really picking Dream World as a song as much as Midnight Oil as a band. But Dream World is an amazing song, and it's just got such a great chorus, and it just gets you hooked, and you just want to sing along every time. It's just a really beautifully crafted song. But it could have been Power and the Passion, could have been obviously Beds of Burning or Hercules or any number of brilliant songs that they put out.
Again, such a wonderful wonderful band. I mean, I've had the privilege of actually chatting to Peter Garrett a few times over the years, just on like different interviews and everything. He's such a fascinating man, and it's just sort of
Mm.
like there's like just someone like him. He feels like so perfectly suited for a band like that. Midnight Oil are one of those sort of bands where it's like they are a sum of their parts, and if they don't have one of those parts, it all sort of starts falling apart. And I
Mm.
think, like songs like Dreamworld are a great example of that. It's just so perfectly done and so representative of who they are as a band.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's why I chose that one. Not necessarily the best Midnight Oil song, but it is a really good example of like, this is what a Midnight Oil song sounds like.
Totally. Totally. And what would the
Mm.
third song be?
I had to put a Hot Snake song in here, especially just the context of what we're talking about. So
Mm.
I chose Plenty for All, uh, which is probably not exemplary of the rest of their recorded output. It's a bit slower and a bit more kind of like rock and roll, but it's just a great uh, upbeat kind of rock and roll song that's just kind of irresistible. So anyone that hasn't heard that, chuck it on. It's like anyone who likes guitar music will like that song.
Oh, truly. No, again, another example of a great guitar band.
Yeah.
You're really picking some great choices here today. I'm really liking them.
Thanks, man. Well, I picked a couple of slightly different ones for the last two. Again, I had to put something in by this band. It could have been any number of songs, but I chose the Kinks. I chose the song Strangers, which is not one of their more known songs, but it is just a beautiful song. And it's not sung by Ray Davies. It's the other Davies brother, whose name is escaping me right now. Dave, that's the one. It's one of Dave's songs. And it's just a really beautiful, tender, kind of poetic song. And I would, the sort of the brief here was 5 songs you can always turn to. And if you're feeling nostalgic or sentimental, not nostalgic, if you're feeling sentimental or like, a bit melancholic, that's the song that I would turn to.
Well, actually, only about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I actually had someone pick Autumn Almanac by the Kinks as well. So you're clearly in fine company. Like I had a few people picking the Kinks, but no one's picked Strangers yet. So I'm glad it's getting some representation.
That's an obscure one, Autumn Almanac as well. But I like that. It's so jaunty and upbeat. Like I could see why you would go back to that song. It would always give you a pickup.
Oh, absolutely. Because actually, it was one that I hadn't actually heard of until they picked it. And obviously, whenever I'm doing this podcast, people pick the songs. I always put them in a Spotify playlist for ease of access, so that anyone listening can listen to it. And I also go back and just listen to them in order. And I'm like, you know what? This is actually a really good way to start this 5 songs, this Autumn Almanac one. And I guess Strangers is a good way to serve as the penultimate one of your list, which is my little segue of saying, what would your 5th song be, Jesse?
Well, yeah, I picked this one. It's a little, I feel like slightly a fraud for picking it, to be completely honest, because I'd only heard it for the first time a few weeks ago. But it's just it's catnip to me. I can't stop listening to it. And it's just, I haven't fell in love with a song this completely in so long, which is Bruce Cockburn, Lovers in a Dangerous Time. Right. I only found out about it because Propaganda's new song, At Peace, references a lyric from this song. So there's the lyric in that, nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. You got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. And that lyric is from the song Lovers in a Dangerous Time by Bruce Cockburn. So I delved into this track and I just fell in love with it. It's just a masterpiece. Really beautiful lyric, really sort of empowering and positive, but it just a really melancholic kind of, but at the same time danceable, a fun song. It's the best of all the good things that the 80s had to offer, basically. Great songwriting, that sort of particularly 80s production, chorus on everything, and just it's just a beautiful song. And I could see myself, when in doubt or just wanting something, again, in the same way that I picked Strangers for, if you was, in a fit of sentimentality, Love's in a Dangerous Time would be a great song to turn to.
So I haven't actually heard Bruce's original, but I am actually aware of the cover version by the Bare Naked Ladies, another Canadian band.
Right.
I think their song, I think their version actually became like their first charting hit or something like that. So it's definitely a good sort of like introductory point if anyone hasn't heard the original or they haven't heard Propaganda's referencing of it in their new single. But I'm very
and you know what, I actually haven't heard the Bare Naked Ladies version, so I got to go off and listen to that after this.
See, everyone is a winner when it comes to the Trusty Chords podcast, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Amazing. Well, I think that actually is a nice little way for us to close by me saying, Jesse Coulter, I want to say thank you so very much for your time today and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast.
Really appreciate you having me, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you were able to take a few moments to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, no obligation, but I'm certainly not going to complain if you go ahead and do just that. As always, I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. I've also got a blog on my website, which is tylerjenke.com, that's tylerjenke/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. That blog features all the details you need to know about this episode, plus a list of all the songs chosen by our guest this week. You can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running if you feel so inclined. Lastly, I need to thank Jesse Coulter for spending time with me for the podcast this week, and also to his bandmate Phil Meakin for hooking up the chat too. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.